Okay, hello all. Let's get started. Um, Welcome and thank you for joining us here at the Plant Materials Center in Lockwood, California. I am Sean Boo, and I will be one of the facilitators for this meeting. And as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and can be viewed at a later date and time. Please keep your microphones muted and your cameras off. Type any questions you may have in the conversation section, and they will be answered later. So let's get started with a short video of the PMC, followed by PMC Manager Margaret Smith-Caporal.
Welcome to the USDA NRCS California Plant Materials Center. Located in California's Central Valley near the beautiful Mokelumne River. Our main focus here at the Plant Materials Center is to develop plant technology for addressing resource concerns, which in California include soil health, water use efficiency for water quality and quantity, air quality, wildlife habitat, and land restoration. This year, we have embarked on a virtual field trip which will be focusing on warm season cover crops that can be utilized during warm summer months, providing a living root to enhance soil health. Throughout the video, our staff will be sharing with you our findings of growing numerous cover crops that flourish in our warm Mediterranean climate with minimal water requirements.
Hello, this is Margaret Smith-Caporal. I am the manager here at the Lockwood Plant Materials Center. Before we begin, I'd like to say thank you for Matthew Bronson, our foreman, and his son Austin, Earth Team volunteer, for working on the video that we've seen, and actually all the videos that we're going to see. Unfortunately, I noticed when we just ran through that the quality was not as clear as when we've run it through with just a few of us here. So I apologize for that and any other technical difficulties that we will have. This is our first ever virtual field day, and I have to tell you, it's been kind of challenging, but very cool. And it's great because we have a wonderful cover crop study that you're going to see in the videos later. So this is our agenda. And I won't read it all out, but I'm speaking now. With this, will be followed by Valerie Bullard, who is the PMC agronomist, who will be showing her work with our study at the moment. And then after that, there'll be time for questions, and please be sure to type your question in the chat in the bar in the middle of Teams. I know some of you may not be familiar with Teams, and all of us, to be honest, are not terribly familiar with it. Then after that, we are fortunate to be able to have 3 representatives from the seed industry, Tom Johnson, Grant Baglietto, and Brian Lowes from their respective companies. And they'll be talking about availability and issues for cover cropping for fall. And again, at the end, we'll have more questions. So with that, I'd like the next slide, Valerie. And so I'm going to be talking about, NRCS and really why we're growing warm season cover crops. As you know, NRCS has a huge focus on soil health, since I've been at the Plant Materials Center for the past 10 years, we've done a lot of work on cover cropping. I would say that's really been our main focus because there is so much bare ground on California and so much potential, and there are so many challenges for us. As we all know, California is a Mediterranean climate. We have a 6 month dry season over the summer where it's really hot and baking. One can grow cover crops over the fall with the winter rains without additional irrigation. However, that's variable within the state, the southern half being so dry. And then the fall cover crops are wonderful, but there can be issues associated with them that do not help all of our producers. For example, some of the worst erosion and windblown dust is in the fall when we have our first winter rains and those terrible windstorms. And then some producers don't want to use full planted cover crops because they grow later into the spring and they may not be able to get into their fields and terminate in time to get their spring crops in. So some years ago, and we've been working on this for four years now, we decided, well, let's see if we can grow warm season cover crops here. And then they will grow in the summer and there will be cover going into fall where we have those problems. And because they're warm season, they will terminate, winter kill by themselves, and termination won't be an issue. So we're going to be looking at various warm season grasses, legumes, and forbs. All of these are very drought tolerant, but they do require some irrigation. Valerie will be talking more about that. So when we look at the benefits of warm season cover crops, of course, we have a living root in the soil and we have cover. This is very important for soil health. And that is probably the main thing. They terminate, so that's not an issue. Then for legumes, the selection of what you decide to choose. Legumes, of course, fix nitrogen, and the amount fixed can be substantial. We'll show you some data on that. They're attractive to pollinators and beneficial insects, and because they're very high nitrogen, the residue breaks down quickly. Grasses, there are a whole lot of grasses. They're wonderful for erosion control and weed suppression in areas where that is a problem. Sometimes they can get a little big. And then finally, there are forbs. And although we at PMC have the luxury, we just work on conservation plantings, and because our facilities and RCS owned, we have the potential to try things out that other people might not be able to have. But we're beginning to see more producers actually utilize these cover crops for whatever their resource concerns are. So with that, I would like to hand over to PMC agronomist Valerie Bullard.
Hi, can you hear me okay, Margaret?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. I lost my mouse for a second, but okay, so I'm going to be showing some of the different warm season cover crop species and cultivars that we're growing at the Plant Materials Center this year in our warm season cover crop trial. We don't get to do a plot tour, unfortunately, but at least I can show you some photos and some videos of what these different species and cultivars look like. So I have a couple photos in a slide deck showing what they look like at 28 DAP, which is days after planting. And just to give everyone an idea of what these species look like about a month in after planting. And then we'll be showing short videos with what they look like at 60 days after planting, along with some, with some of the characteristics, growth characteristics and benefits. So we can get an idea of some of the differences between them. So some of these species, first we're going to look at the warm season grasses, and some of them have already reached 50% bloom or anthesis by the time we shot the video. So at 60 days, they're already way past the point you want to terminate them. They're already going to seed. And so I've included some photos of what they looked like when I went through and sampled them at 50% bloom, which is kind of the point of the last point of termination. You don't want them to go far beyond that because they'll start setting seed. So the first one right here is Prozone millet. And on the left, you can see it's a photo of 28 days after planting. And on the right is at 50% bloom at 47 days after planting. So this is what it looks like when it's about 50% anthesis. And then here's some photos of the other warm season grasses that were growing at the PMC, Japanese millet, Sudan grass, and teff, and what they looked like at about a month after planting. So next we'll show a short video with what these guys look like at 60 days after planting. So the first plot we're going to look at is Prozone millet. This is the quickest growing warm season grass cover crop. It's great if you have a short window in like a couple weeks to go plant something that'll cover the ground and help with weed suppression. It has one of the lowest water requirements of any cereal. The fibrous roots are great for scavenging nitrogen and providing some weed suppression. And it is slower to decompose and break down though. One of the things to keep in mind when planting really fast growing warm season cover crops is that they mature really quickly. So with this guy, you want to get out there and terminate it, because it starts going to seed in 45 or 50 days. This is Japanese millet. This is another vigorous growing warm season grass. It takes longer to mature than Prozone millet. You can see it's just beginning to head out. This guy gets about 2 to 4 feet tall, and it can produce quite a bit of biomass and residue. And the residue is a little bit slower to break down, so be aware of that. It's great for forage and wildlife habitat, but if you plant it in wet areas, it can become a weed problem. This is Sudan grass. This is a really vigorous growing warm season grass. It can get 5 to 12 feet tall. That being said, it can produce a lot of biomass and residue that can be a bit challenging to manage if you let it get really big, and a challenge to chop up and incorporate. So we actually recommend that for Sudan grass, you start mowing it when it's about 3 feet tall. It'll keep it vegetative, it'll encourage tillering and root growth, and it'll be a lot easier to manage. It's great for weed suppression and scavenging for nitrogen and breaking up compaction layers with the fibrous roots. It's used to help a lot of soils that have on land that's has issues, but the biomass can be one of the biggest challenges to manage with it. Also, it suppresses root knot nematodes, so that's another benefit. When following up with crop after Sudan grass, you want to make sure you wait 6 to 8 weeks after you chop it and incorporate the residue, because it can cause some allelopathic problems with the following transplants. So be aware of that when using it as a cover crop. This is teff. This is a low-growing warm season grass. It only gets about 2 or 3 feet tall. It's a lot finer residue, and so it breaks down a lot faster. It's also great forage quality. You can actually get 2 or 3 cuttings out of it and harvest it just as it starts heading out. one of the biggest challenges with this cover crop is the tiny seed. It is very tiny, and it should only be planted to about a 1/4 inch depth. So you need a firm seed bed. So it can be really challenging to plant. I actually have a grower who uses it, and he said that his way of determining if the seed bed is firm enough is if he can bounce a basketball off of it before he plants the teff. So to give you an idea of the seed prep required for this guy. Okay. So next we're gonna go through the warm season legumes that we have in the trial. We have quite a few different cowpea cultivars and as well as some other legumes. The first one in the slide here is California black-eyed cowpea, and it's one of the earliest maturing cowpeas. You can see on the left, it's at 28 days after planting. It's quite small, and then at 54 days after planting, it reached 50% bloom. So before the video was shot, it was already blooming. In the video, it shows it setting seed pod, which is after the point you want to terminate it. And then here's what the other warm season cowpeas look like: Chinese red, red ripper, iron and clay, and we also have an experimental cowpea that we're evaluating this year. And these are the other warm season legumes that we're evaluating in the trial. We have sun hemp, sesbania, and pigeon pea. And we'll go in show you another video here of what these look like at 60 days after planting and some of their benefits and growth characteristics. Okay, so next we're going to talk about warm season legumes. And one of the most common warm season legumes are cowpeas. Cowpeas, there's a whole number of different cultivars with a variety of maturity dates and growth types that can fit into your operation. There are many to choose from. They're great because they fix nitrogen. They fix about 100 to 150 pounds an acre, and they decompose quickly. They only get about 2 or 3 feet tall, so they don't get too big. Their flowers are attractive to pollinators, but if seed pods develop, it can attract stink bugs and ligus. So be aware of that if that's those pests are a concern for your following or neighboring crops. The seed will rot in cold, wet soil, so you don't want to plant them too early, and you don't want to plant them in waterlogged soils. The best way to plant them is to pre-irrigate and then plant them into moisture. And then you only need about 1 irrigation to get them going and to really take off. So the first one we're looking at here is California black-eyed cowpea. This is a really common one that's used here in California. As you can see, there's already some seed pods developing, so it's well past bloom. So it matured earlier than 60 days. So if you have a shorter window of planting for cowpea, then maybe this would fit. The next one we're going to look at is on the opposite end of the spectrum. This is iron and clay. This one is actually a mix of bushy and viney cowpea, and this one will take up to 90 days or even more to mature. This is the 3rd year we've grown it, and I have not seen it bloom yet. Actually, it winter kills before it starts blooming. So if you have a field and you have some time to put in a cover crop and you don't want to worry about it going to seed pod, then this might be a good option. This is Chinese red cowpea. It's very similar to the red ripper cowpea. They mature in about 60 days or so. So right now we're just starting to see blooms on these plants. This is an experimental cowpea that we're looking at this year. It's a crop candidate developed at UC Riverside. And so far, it's looking really good. We'll take some more evaluations and samples and keep watching it throughout the growing season. See how it compares to some of the other cultivars. This is pigeon pea. It's another cover crop candidate developed at UC Riverside. It's so far it looks pretty well adapted to the Central Valley. It seems to be doing well. In the literature, it says it can fix up to 62 pounds of nitrogen an acre to pod set. So it'll be interesting to see how much nitrogen we can get out of it this year. It's typically grown in the tropics and subtropics. So yeah, it's been interesting to evaluate over this season. This is Sesbania. It's a flood-tolerant tall legume. It can get up to 10 feet tall, which can be a bit of a challenge. It can fix 90 to 130 pounds of nitrogen an acre. To terminate it, though, we actually recommend that you mow it when it's about 3 feet tall. The stems can get really woody and be tough to chop up and slow to break down. So mowing it about at 3 feet will keep it nice and green, and it'll decompose a lot more quickly. We recommend that you do a low mow versus a crimp. I've actually talked to a grower who tried to roller crimp it, and it bent down and then started growing back up again. So mowing for this one. The flowers attract pollinators and beneficial insects. I've also seen aphid on it, and the seed pods can be attractive to stink bugs as well. So, but we don't want to let it to get that far along. This is sun hemp. It's a drought-tolerant legume that was traditionally used for fiber. It can fix 100 to 150 pounds of nitrogen an acre. It can get 4 to 8 feet tall, but we recommend that you terminate it at about 3 feet tall, as it starts getting really fibrous and it's tough to break down and chop up. So if you keep it smaller, it's easier to cut and decomposes a lot more quickly. It also suppresses root knot nematode, and the flowers are attractive for pollinators. It can attract ligus as well, so if that's a pest of concern, be aware of that. Okay. And finally, we have the forbs, and we're going 2 different forbs this year in our cover crop trial. The first one is buckwheat, and on the left, you can see what it looks like at 28 days after planting, which is actually some pretty good growth on it already after about a month. And then on the right, it reached 50% bloom at 40 days after planting. So it is a really fast growing cover crop for a short planting window. And in the video, it'll be actually beyond and going to seed beyond the point you want to terminate it. And finally, here's a sunflower that we're growing this year as another forb at 28 days after planting. And we have our final video here of the cover crop plots that will show you what these look like at 60 days after planting.
So this video has a very low volume, so there's nothing we could do about it right now, but if you want to turn up your volume as high as you can, that helps a little, but this is just low volume video, sorry.
Okay, now we're going to take a look at some of the warm season forbs. This is the first plot we're going to look at is buckwheat, and you can see this one is well past bloom. It's actually going to seed. This sky will actually start blooming, going to seed in 25 to 30 days. So this is an excellent quick cover, short window cover crop. It's the fastest growing warm season cover crop there is, and it pops out of the ground quickly. It's great for smothering weeds, but you have to be on it or else it can go to seed. After it starts blooming, you have about 7 to 10 days to mow it down before it starts setting seed, and then which can cause a buckwheat weed problem. It's an excellent insectary plant. You come over and look at these plots, and they're just humming with bees. It's pretty amazing, and it's great for mining nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium as well, and it decomposes quickly. So if you have just a couple weeks, you want to throw something in the ground, this is an excellent cover crop. Over here we have sunflower, which this is black sunflower that we used in our plots. There's a number of different cultivars. They can get up to 9 feet tall, depending on what cultivar you choose. They have great tap roots, and they're great for mining nutrients. But the best thing about them is they're great for pollinators. So you can see there's bees all around them, and they look beautiful. So the seeds can attract birds, and the stems can get fibrous and be a little tough to break down, but they're a nice addition to a warm season cover crop mix if you're looking for something that's attractive to pollinators. Okay. So what is the point of growing these trials? This is our 4th year doing these trials of warm season cover crops. And basically we want to see what's well adapted to California's Central Valley and what can survive the summer with minimal irrigation. And we'll want to look at what characteristics are useful specifically to California growers and operations, and some of the benefits. The trial this year is replicated. There's 4 of each plot throughout the field, and that's to compensate for differences in soil texture or moisture that may be in spots. The seeding rates vary depending on what species. So if you're interested in what seeding rates we use for what species, I'd be happy to share that with you. I just didn't include it in the slide. But we're evaluating 14 different species and cultivars, so there's quite a few out there. And the trial was irrigated multiple times during the growing season. We did a pre-irrigation and planted the deeper seeded species into moisture, like the cowpeas, the bigger seeded species, and then used hand line and a wheel line to irrigate up the smaller seeded species, as well as continue to irrigate through the season. And the total irrigation we used was about a little over 3 inches. So here are some of the evaluations that we collected and are collecting over the season. It's still going. Germination is a good indicator for how quick does it jump out of the ground, and how quickly it establishes. The canopy cover is useful for weed suppression and erosion prevention. Disease and insect
Valerie,
resistance.
I don't see the next slide.
Oh, thank you. Oops. You don't see the evaluations?
Yeah, I see it.
Can you see it now, Margaret?
No, but if HUD sees it, it's fine. You see it, HUD?
Okay.
I see it.
Okay.
I can't see it, Valerie.
I'm getting a bad network quality signal. That's okay. We'll just keep going. And so the other evaluations we collect at 50% bloom, and that's an important benchmark because that's the optimum nitrogen content in the legumes. It's also kind of the latest point in maturity that that you want them to grow. So it's kind of the termination date, last termination date, if you do not want it to go to seed. So it's kind of the maximum amount of nitrogen and biomass that you can get out of the cover crop. So we collect above ground biomass in each plot. That's about a square foot at this point, and we submit that for total nitrogen content, and then can get an idea of how much nitrogen that cover crop might be contributing. And we also look at the carbon to nitrogen ratio to see how quickly it might be able to break down. And then we also collect plant height at that point to see how tall it gets. Okay. And here's some graphs of data from 2017 and 18. It does not include 2019 data. We had some issues with germination and soil crusting. So, but this year I will continue to add to this data and hopefully get some nice averages of what these different cover crop species and cultivars can produce. So you can kind of see each of these circles groups the different species. So the grasses are on the right, the legumes are all in the middle in the red circle, and then the forbs are down on the lower left. And the big above ground biomass, this is wet above ground biomass. The big producers are, for grasses, are the Sudan grass and Japanese millet. You get a lot of biomass out of those. And then the cowpeas actually produce quite a bit. The iron and clay is a big biomass producer, and Chinese red. And we also got a lot out of the sun hemp. And then here's the estimated nitrogen yield, which for the legumes is really important. So get an idea of how much nitrogen you might be getting from this cover crop. The again, the cowpeas are in a red, or I'm sorry, they're in a red circle, but the cowpeas are in blue. Right here is the iron and clay, and then the yellow is Chinese red, and those have a fair amount of nitrogen. And then on the right, there is the sun hemp and hemp sesbania, which also contribute quite a bit of nitrogen. Keep in mind that these are averages taken from the point of 50% bloom, so kind of the maximum point and last termination point that you would get. We recommend that you terminate these earlier if you don't want to get them to break down faster, especially the sun hemp and hemp sesbania. So in future trials, I'd really like to actually start terminating these earlier, more along the lines of when growers would terminate them to fit them into their operations. So get some nitrogen data that would be a lot more useful for growers, what they might actually be getting at certain points in termination and times, versus this is kind of the maximum amount that you might get out of these cover crops if you just let them keep growing. And finally, here's a slide of some of the maturity dates, how long they take to bloom. And this is available in a case study that we wrote up, and it has a written description that might be a little bit easier to read. And it's available on the PDF the link is available on the PDF that was sent out. And if you didn't get that, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to send it to you. It's just a short little 4-pager on some of the maturity dates of these different species and cultivars. So in the upper left, the buckwheat you can see is reaching maturity a lot faster than the black sunflower. And the lower left, the white prosome millet is the first to mature compared to the other warm season grasses. And finally, on the right, there's the different legumes. The black-eyed cowpea is the first to mature, and then the iron and clay is way out here at 90 to 100 days to reach maturity. And this data is just from 2018 and 17 again, so we'll keep adding to this as the years continue. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I think HUD is going to kind of help field those from the chat box. Feel free to type them in if you have a few questions.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie, and thanks everybody for viewing today. It's really great to see the great large attendance. We do have several questions already, like right off the bat. Marcos asked if you could kind of reiterate some of the high points, Marcos in Bakersfield, some of the high points of sorghum Sudan grass, what you got to watch out for if you incorporate it, and maybe also touch on the nematode action there.
Okay, so the Sudan grass is a great cover crop, but it can be a challenge. It is really drought tolerant and it grows pretty quickly, so it can get tall. So kind of depending on what you're using it for, if you're using it for biomass or to break up compaction or for weed suppression, there's kind of different ways to manage it. But since it can grow so tall, if you don't have the equipment, the biomass can be overwhelming and really hard to chop up and incorporate, especially if it gets a little bit of has a little residual nitrogen and moisture in the soil. So I recommend mowing that one frequently, just because it can get so tall so fast. And in the literature, it mentions that it suppresses root knot nematode, but I haven't done any studies with that. But maybe some of the seed guys could touch on that.
And it can hinder future crop germination.
Yes, it's you want to wait a couple weeks after you incorporate it, especially the sorghum Sudan grass. It has allelopathic effects on the following crops. I know Jeff Mitchell's done some studies on that, where he's put in some transplants following the incorporation of Sudan grass, and it has injured some of the transplants if they're planted too soon. You want to wait like 6 to 8 weeks. Give it some time to break down a bit more, so you don't injure your following crop.
Great, thanks, Valerie. Jesus Toro asked Margaret if these videos are available on YouTube. I believe they are, correct, or they will be.
Well, this is Margaret. Actually, they are on YouTube at the moment. We're using them from YouTube because we found that easier than having it on our computers. So they're on YouTube at the moment. But I think we will be doing some editing and maybe redoing the sound on some of them. We also talked about putting these, because we took more videos than we've shown you today, that maybe making even a larger video of everything all together. So yes, there will be something there, but we'll let everybody know when it's ready.
Great. Great, thank you. And Michelle asked, I don't know if you have it in front of you, what the seeding rates you used for the cowpeas. Obviously, you used several different varieties or cultivars.
Yeah, we used, typically you use like 30 to 50 pounds an acre, and I think we used 40, like for 40 pure live seeds per acre.
Thanks. And pardon me if I mispronounce your name, but Hamyar Aram asked a question about, how late can you get away with planting these warm season cover crops to give them enough time to grow before winter frost?
It kind of depends on which cover crop you want to use. They will, if the soil's too cold, they don't do that well, and they will kill, winter kill with frost. So it kind of depends on your area when your frost date is. You can kind of look at a calendar over the years and see when that was. I mean, if you only have a short window, you only have a couple weeks, buckwheat's great. It jumps out of the ground and gets growing real fast. You've got some good biomass in a couple weeks. But yeah, it kind of depends on what issue you're addressing. If you want, nitrogen, the legumes, some of them you may want to let them grow a little bit longer. And then for biomass, the grasses are pretty vigorous and drought tolerant, but it depends.
All right.
Margaret,
Go ahead, Margaret.
because we actually did a case study about 4 or 5 years ago where we planted not a whole lot, but a few different things from, I think, the middle of August through the middle of October. And the August was really good. Anyway, we can send you the information on that. And it actually might possibly be in that link that we've already sent out. If not, let us know, because there is potential of planting later, and we want to do more work on this area too.
Great. All right, I'm gonna just ask you to field one more question so that we can move on, and then I'll do my best to go back at the end because we'll probably have more questions. The question I'm seeing, oops, a whole bunch just came in, hold on. Is the biomass, Margaret, is the biomass also max at 50% bloom?
Oh, that is a tough question, but and it would probably depend upon the species, I would think. But I mean, that's the time when these are annual plants, and after they're 50% bloom, they start setting seed, and the resources are being transferred from the vegetative growth into the seeds. So I can't really answer that, but that's my answer as best as I can give it. What would you think, Valerie?
Maybe for all intents and purposes, we could say
I would
yes.
say yes. That's kind of, I think, part of the reason we pick that time as well.
All right, so I'll
Good
let you
question.
take, thanks, Valerie and Margaret. I'm gonna let you take control again and try to field these after Tom and Grant.
Yes. So yeah, and the first video that we have, actually, going back to the agenda, the first video that we have after this is Hudson Minshew talking about NRCS programs. And so Sean, would you cue, this is actually our last video.
Hi, my name is Hudson Minshew. I'm the state conservation agronomist for NRCS California. And what we're looking at here is some warm season cover crops. But what I'd like to just mention is we have a number of cost share programs to help offset the cost of planting cover crops if you're thinking about it.
we have the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, which will offset some of the seed costs and some of your operation costs to get these established. And you can receive payments for up to 5 years in that program. The good thing about it is once you establish yourself with our agency and you go through the EQIP program, then you can also sign up for the Conservation Stewardship Program after that. And you get another incentive for maintaining and enhancing some of the things that you're already doing. So those are some good things to think about. And I encourage, if you're interested, to reach out to one of our field offices. We have them in almost every county in the state, and they're the experts that will help you walk through that signing up for EQIP or CSP, we call it.
Excellent, thank you. So I noticed the questions are piling up here. We will answer them as best we can at the end. I'm wondering, so right now the plan is to move to our supporting seed producers who have agreed to be on, and they're each going to talk for about 5 minutes. So I'm happy to introduce Tom Johnson, CanPress Seed, who has been a really long-term collaborator with us at the PMC. Grant Baglietto from Baglietto Seed, who is also very local and been very helpful to us. And Brian Lowes with Lockwood Seed, and who's also worked with us, and we've visited their trials as well. Actually, is Brian on? Because he was going to come in a bit late. Good, Tom, are you there? Over to you. Would you like to start speaking?
Okay. Margaret set us up with some questions here to kind of answer, which covers a lot of the territory for fall planting. We're switching gears. We're going from warm season to more traditional cover crop timing for California, which is plant in fall, terminate spring, use the winter rainfall to our advantage type of thing. So what they were kind of asking was something that's kind of near and dear to a seed guy's heart is, cover crop logistics and availability. Availability will say that some stuff may be limited, but we are getting everything that is normally used. Supply looks good. Nothing's really tight that we know of. The logistics part is if you're using what we call a stock mix or you're using a custom mix, the later in the season it gets, the more likely you may run into that limitation of material, or the longer it may take to turn around from order to delivery. It's just the nature of the beast that everything piles up and all they got to do is holler rain in October and everybody just goes bonkers. So that's, plan ahead, think about it, know what you think you want to use, discuss that with whoever's getting your seed for you. Perspective on the shortages, basically. Okay, well, cover cropping is becoming much more popular across the United States. And now we're starting to realize that, hey, we need to produce more seed for that. So in the years to come, some things may become more available, some things may drop out, depending on the economics of producing it. We import seed from Australia, South America, Canada, and get a tremendous amount of it from California and Oregon, and they fit our Mediterranean climate. And a lot of that stuff also gets shipped to the Midwest, so sometimes we're in competition. CanPress Seed that I work with makes custom seed mixes for our dealer network, which is mostly the AgChem reps and the seed companies. We have a few stock mixes of our own that would be on the floor, depending on the size of operation, depending on the need, how fast you got to have it. We may steer you that way, we may not. So we're training our sales staff, which is your PCA, your consultant, on kind of like, okay, well, that doesn't work here, or that works good here. Don't put too much of that in, that type of thing. So it's an ongoing thing, just like the rest of us learning about cover cropping. the challenges and considerations for fall planting. Plan ahead, pure and simple. Start thinking about it at or before harvest. Bring it up with your supplier as to when you think you're going to need it, what you think you're going to want, and where you want it delivered to. Then it's not such a surprise. It's not such an issue. Our biggest tripper that we're running across all the time is planting equipment, people to plant it, or having equipment to plant it. Sometimes you got to get a little creative, but we can make a lot of things work depending on time of year and so on and so forth. The challenges successful cover crop planting is, again, it's that planning part. We can tell you, okay, you need to have a good seed bed, or you don't need to have as good a seed bed, depending on what you're going to plant. And think about integrating it into your system. In other words, if you're an open ground farmer and you harvested your tomatoes and you know you're going to put in wheat, your window is only X big. And by window, I mean the chance or time to make a mix or plant something out there to cover that ground, keep a root in the ground. If you came out of tomatoes and you know you're going to go back into tomatoes, you have a longer window. You can use different things. And then basically designating wholesale and retail differences. I work for a wholesale company. Like I said, we have a dealer network that we work with. We do a little bit of retail sales, but we're going to say, hey, if you're working with so-and-so that works for ABC chemical company, he can order it and you can get it from him and he'll help you get it put together and all that fun stuff. Some of my competitors do a lot of retail sales. This is not our business model, but it is the business model of quite a few people out there. And then I'd like to say that, yeah, the Lockford facility has been doing a wonderful job for almost 10 years now that I've been working with them. And we're learning a lot of things. We get to try out some ideas, and it's a wonderful place to work. So I think that's about what I needed to say today.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And maybe if Ron could come put his video on so we could see him. Ron, here we go. Wonderful.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Glad to see such a good turnout. I would really love to be out in the field right now looking at those beautiful summer cover crops, but got to commend the NRCS team for bringing us as close as we can get. It's gone pretty smooth. So I'll reiterate what Tom said about logistics and availability for cover crop seeds this fall. Logistics are our main issue. Availability is not really a great issue. Logistics wasn't an issue for us yesterday, but it's day to day with fires, closing down freeways, and COVID, and all the challenges that we're dealing with here in 2020. Mostly everything that you would normally order is going to be available in a timely fashion this year. Nothing really short. There's nothing really short as far as individual crops goes. Supply is good on legumes, grains, grasses. There's no real shortages out there. Yeah, the only thing logistically, if you're thinking about planting a cover crop, especially if you're thinking about planting a custom mix, if you want specific items included in it, the earlier you can order, the better. If you know you need it now, order it now. We're about 2 to 3 days on any kind of custom mix. The closer we get into October or November, that can kind of trail off a little bit, depending on how busy we are and weather patterns and all that. We carry several ready-to-go mixes, about 4 or 5 on the floor. It's good to have a ready-to-go mix that we put components in it that have been kind of tried and true in the local area here. They're usually some combination of legumes, grains, grasses, and depending on exactly what you're going for with your cover crop mixture. The basics of cover cropping is you need to know what your goal is with the cover crop. Are you trying to reduce compaction in the soil? Are you trying to increase water infiltration? Are you trying to add biomass, organic matter? All those questions need to be asked before you decide what type of cover crop you're going to plant. But we feel like the stock mixes that we do carry cover a lot of those bases. But ultimately, it comes down to what you're trying to do with the cover crop. You know, cover cropping is a system. If you're new to cover cropping, don't expect to see wild, crazy results next year from your crop, whatever your permanent crop is or your annual crop is. It's a time strategy. So you do it year after year, and you're going to do things like improve water infiltration, add organic matter to your soil. You're slowly going to improve your soil health and ultimately whatever crop you're nursing or the permanent crop that you're trying to take care of. Planning ahead, planting dates, you know, it kind of also depends on exactly what you're trying to do. If you're looking to plant in almonds and you really want an early pollinator, get the bees up and running, the first 2 weeks of October is a great time to plant, even late September, weather dependent. Any biomass related cover crop you're going to want to plant anywhere between now and December, really. Challenges for planting a successful cover crop. Usually you want to shoot, as far as planting depth goes, you want to shoot for about 10 times the diameter of the seed. If you're using a seed mix, it can be a little bit challenging. We always say go. Majority of seeds in most cover crop mixes are going to be on the smaller side, and a lot of the bigger seeds like your fava beans or your peas will still germinate in a shallow planting depth. We are primarily a retail operation. We do some wholesale as well, but we are open to the public. We do custom mixes. Our turnaround time is very good. We do delivery right to your ranch, your facility, and I think that's pretty much it. That probably about covers it. If anyone had any questions for Tom or I.
Wow.
Great. Thanks. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say thank you very much. You don't know this, Hud, but I had a call from Brian Lose from Lockwood Seed last night saying that he thought that he would like, I had asked him initially, do I hear back? And then he said he'd be able to. Is he on here?
Thank you.
Brian, you there?
Yeah.
Okay. What? Okay, Hud, over to you.
Well, thanks, Margaret. So again, folks, if you have specific questions for Grant and Tom, the seed dealers, go ahead and type them in, and the other questions we'll circle back after these guys and answer those at the end. So Grant, I just wanted to ask you to repeat. Because my computer froze on you and I couldn't hear you. Can you please repeat what you said about planting depth? 10 times the diameter is a rule of thumb, and then with a mix, how you should adjust for mixes because you have different depths requirements.
Yeah, thanks, Hud. The general planting depth guideline is 10 times the diameter of the seed. When you're planting a mix that has both mustard and fava beans in it, those are two very, very different sized seeds. And mustard being a 1/4 inch, fava beans, being somewhere closer to 2 inches. But in general, if you're kind of leaning towards whatever your shallower seed depth requirement is, that's probably the recommended way to go as far as getting the best germination on all of the components in the mix.
Thank you for clarifying that. And Cheryl Fight just wrote in and asked about you provide seed on for small scale operations. I think we touched on this yesterday in our practice, but could Tom, could you address that? And Grant, you can chime in if Tom doesn't cover everything.
Yeah, on a smaller operation, and we do field those phone calls. Um, Depending on what they're trying to do, a lot of times I will kind of steer them towards a what we call a stock mix, um, because they're talking. You know, small guys sometimes they're talking an acre, and it's like, okay, well, you know, that's a lot of hassle to go through a custom mix when this will accomplish 95% of what you're trying to accomplish, and I have it made up, and you can come get it. Because most of the time they're calling and saying, well, I'm coming down there in 5 minutes to pick it up on top of it all. Sometimes we will steer them, if they're already dealing with somebody, we'll steer them back to the dealer. Sometimes we'll just handle it in-house per se. Um, that is one of the gaps in my dealer network is people that take care of smaller holdings, you know, 1 to 5, 1 to 10 acre type of thing. And it's a large portion out there, but it's not as well served as it could be, but it's tough to serve. It's really high maintenance to do it. I think Grant would say probably the same thing. It's like, yeah, I need 27.5 pounds of this stuff, and it's like, well, I'd really rather sell you a 50-pound bag. That way you got it more than enough.
Is it different for Grant being he's retail and you're wholesale? Is one more nimble than the other to do that?
Yeah, like I said, you know, we do have stock mixes here on the floor. We package everything by the 50-pound bag. You know, in some circumstances, for home gardens, for example, you know, we have accommodated people's needs if they needed 20 pounds or 10 pounds or whatever it is. We try to be accommodating and get people what they need.
Good, thanks. Hey, Tom, could you reiterate what you said about surprises, or I forget how you said it, but surprises about equipment needs for planting? You said sometimes that can be a pinch point.
Yeah, what we've run into a lot of times is the best way to plant a lot of these things is with a seed drill. And there's seed drills out there, but it's probably got to hit 500 to 1,000 acres of an operation to make it worthwhile to purchase that piece of equipment, because it's going to work like heck for about 2 weeks, and then it's going to sit there the rest of the year. And they're not cheap, and it takes up space and so on and so forth. So a lot of people are not quite in that range where they can afford to do that. So they need somebody to either come do it for them or find another way to do it. A lot of these things we run them through a grain drill. So a lot of those are fairly easy to find. It's just fitting them under trees if that's what you're planting into. But sometimes it's like, okay, well, I want to plant a clover cover crop, or I'm planting a mustard cover crop. And it's like, well, those are teeny tiny seed. They go through a grain drill like water. So, and a lot of the grain drills don't have a whole lot of adjustment. So it's like, okay, well, maybe you need to look at, let's go find a broadcaster or a small, or even an alfalfa planter or something like that, which is more specific. So it's stumbling around trying to find that. So if you're contemplating switching over from something that you had been planting with a grain drill and you want to try something smaller, your trees are coming in bearing and you don't want all that residue potential or whatever, then beforehand, in like basically summertime when it's a little slow, is basically to be looking around for thinking, I'm changing over, I need to find a planter, whether I'm going to go buy one or I'm going to find somebody to do it for me. And that's sometimes you have to come back to the seed dealer and ask them, because some of my dealers have equipment, some of the other ones don't have equipment, but know somebody that does. So it's better to ask questions ahead of time. You know, what kind of planter do I have to have? That's a viable question. That's one that should be asked. So, you know, rather than it shows up on your dock and it's like, oh, how am I going to put this out? That's the surprise that can be kind of ugly.
So that can fall under the category of logistics, I suppose, what Grant was stressing, not only getting the seed, but having the equipment ready. I'm not seeing any recent questions in the queue, but here's one from Marcos. It's kind of making my head scratch a little bit. I'll read it to you. It says, given the depth of research on cover crops and the impacts on creating niches, would you suggest to use IPM tactics to monitor cover crop effects? It's a rather challenging question. I'm not sure how to answer it myself. If he's talking about,
I prescribe crop as an IPM practice because that's providing structure and nectar and various other things for a lot of your beneficial insects. It also hides a lot of the ones that you don't want. I have clients that utilize your cover crop to attract the bugs they don't want and concentrate them, makes them easier to kill or easier to control. So it's a fuzzy area of research on cover crops, and basically, until we get small enough tracking devices to make sure that the bugs we like are moving from the cover crop into the cash crop and back again, we're not exactly sure if it really is doing it, but the indications are that yes, it helps. So it's like I said, I prescribe it as an IPM practice, or part of your integrated pest management practice, is to leave cover, leave structure out there in that field. And a cover crop's usually the only way you're going to do that.
Thanks. Yes, we would do that as well. All right. Since I don't have any more, I'm not seeing any new questions, so let me back up here and I'll open it up for all of you, Margaret, Grant, Valerie, everybody. So let me go back up. Christine Brown asked Valerie if you could go over the irrigation requirements again for the warm season cover crops.
Yeah, I go over what we did. So this year, when we were prepping the field, we did a pre-irrigation and actually came back and planted the larger seeded species into moisture. So it was moist about an inch down. And that worked really well for the larger seeded species, the cowpeas especially, really, it worked really well for them. And some of the tricky parts with some of these cover crops is that, they require different planting depths. So a lot of the smaller seeded species like Japanese millet, Prozone millet, teff especially, they're planted really shallow. And so we had to, there was no moisture in the surface. It, dries out really quickly. So we had to use a wheel line or lay out some hand line and irrigate those up. And the field we chose and just how our trial was set up, it actually watered everything. So everything got about, in total, a little over 3 inches of water, and that included that was the sprinklers after the pre-irrigation. And that was throughout. We used the sprinkler irrigation to get things germinating on the smaller seeded side, and then to keep things growing. Things like the buckwheat start wilting when it gets really hot and windy, and we wanted to keep them alive long enough to take some evaluations, because it was a pretty hot summer this year. So, and I hope next year to include more of my soil moisture sensors, and really track what the different species are using and where, in terms of soil moisture content and water.
This is Margaret. I'd like to add something, if that's okay. And this is This was this year, and previous years we planted our warm season cover crop in another field, and we used a linear irrigation system, which is more precise for irrigating. I think we used, but it's probably similar amount of moisture, but it's maybe a little less than this field. We think this was a little sandier. I think we will find that this is going to be really site specific. Everybody's going to have to figure out if they want to use warm season cover crops, how they're going to do it. I know somebody who uses sun hemp in rice and tomatoes. I think, well, that's, they have flood irrigation available there, so it's a whole different ball game. I think depending on your situation, it will be very different. So that's all I have to add to that.
Good. And now that I have you on, oh, was somebody else chiming in there? Since I have you on the spot, Margaret, did you answer Adrian Martin's question? It says, are you specifically saying that 32 degrees or less will definitely winter kill? Or would the kill temps be less than that for any species? In other words, are some more frost resistant than others?
Oh, I think all of these are going to die with the frost. We see them even before they slow down. Their growth slows down. They look really miserable as soon as it starts getting a little bit cold at night, under 50 degrees. And I think the winter kill will kill all of them. So yeah, it's really interesting. And then, of course, the rate at which they break down and how much weed suppression you're going to have ongoing from that is depends on the species. So if you've had a lot of grasses, it'll take longer than if you had a lot of nitrogen. And we haven't even got into looking at mixes yet, really. And I think there's huge potential for that, for fine-tuning what would be best for a different area. Before I worked in California, I spent some years in Florida, and there they were using sun hemp a lot as an intercrop with tomatoes because root knot nematode was a huge problem with tomatoes and it was suppressive. And so there was a lot of research on that. And I wonder about how effective a sun hemp would be here. I believe Scott Park uses it, so that's one producer who uses it. And it does fix a lot of nitrogen, but it does need more water than perhaps some of the other ones. So it's just a species by species variation. I feel that when it comes to warm season cover crops for California, we're just in the early stages of figuring out what to do and how best to use it.
Thanks. Yeah, I remember in Hawaii, that was the main reason we had sun hemp growing, was for the nematode problem. But of course, it wouldn't winter kill there. So Marcos has another question about allelopathy. I can never say that, but are there other, Valerie, if you want to answer, are there other cultivars that have the same effect, the allelopathic effect on other plants?
That's a good question. For cover crops, Tom and Grant, I can't think of any right now.
Of the warm season ones, I know Sudan grass has a certain amount of allelopathic effect. In the cool season ones, ryegrain is noted to have some. Otherwise, I'd have to go looking through a whole bunch of reference materials, but a lot of them don't have. The grasses are probably a little more common about having allelopathic effect, although I seem to recall hearing that sun hemp has a little bit. I think sometimes depending on whether you want the allelopathic effect during growing season or whether you notice it when you plant back, that may be where you start seeing, that was the problems. So it's something that people are aware of, but it got buried a long time ago, and we're all kind of rediscovering stuff that was discovered and noted and written down in the 40s and 50s, and then just kind of got buried as more and more green agriculture, not green, but chemical agriculture got done and people didn't have to worry about that type of stuff. So it's something we can look at. It's tough to study in a field operation per se. Getting it done in a lab probably is, or in a greenhouse situation might be easier, but again, it's time and effort.
Great. Somebody had a, thank you, Tom. Somebody had a question about what equipment was used to plant the warm season cover crops. Does somebody want to go over that? I don't know if Matthew's on or if one of you want to do it.
Valerie, you want to take that one?
Sure. We have a Great Plains no-till drill that's got equipped with a cone or plot planter on it, which is really great for doing trials. But it does take quite a bit of adjustment to go from seeding some of the bigger seeded species like cowpea and the depth versus planting something like Japanese millet that doesn't like it very deep. So we have to adjust the depth, and the plot planter plants it. It's about 5 feet wide, 5.5 feet wide, and it plants it in plots that are about 25 feet long. And the only one that we planted that we did not use the plot planter was the teff, and that's because it's just so small seeded. We have a really hard time getting it shallow enough. I basically just broadcast it over the top and then pressed it in on those plots because I've had so much failure in the last couple of years. It just plants it too deep.
Thanks, Valerie. Well, that's all the questions I have in the queue.
Oh, no, there's
Oh,
another one.
Oh, okay. What are the seeding rates for planting warm season cover crops using a no-till drill, big versus small seed? This is from Dag Osorio.
So I'd be happy to share that with you. I mean, I don't know if that's easier to look at in an email or something like that. The different species have different seeding rates, and typically what we do is usually what they list for the recommended seeding rate for certain species, we take kind of, it's like 30 to 50 pounds an acre for cowpeas. So I'll use 40 pounds pure live seed, so an acre. And then the same thing with the smaller seeded species. Sorry, I lost track. But for broadcast, we usually double those rates because broadcast seeding is a little more challenging to get the seed where you want it. So for NRCS, we typically say 1.5 to 2 times the seeding rate, which is the drill seeding rate typically, which is what Tom and Grant and Brian will recommend on their seeding rate mixes that you're buying. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. So would this be a good opportunity to put a plug in for the eVeg guide?
Yes.
So yeah. Good. Well, I'm going to turn it over to eVeg guide, where we set our seeding rates for drilled versus broadcast. A good place to start. I'm going to turn this back over to, I guess it's Margaret, but thanks everybody for giving me the opportunity to help answer questions and do this. Appreciate it. Signing off. Bye.
Bye. Well, thank you so much. Actually, I would like to add a little bit on the last question about the seeding rates, because this is a very difficult, complex issue that we've been wrestling with at the moment. NRCS normally uses kind of a fixed rate of 25 seeds per square foot for drilled for anything. And of course, this will vary on the size of the seed. So if you have something with a small seed, then it's going to be less than something with a huge seed. And we're looking at this with cover crops. So you would say, well, 25 seeds per square foot drilled, 50 broadcast, that seems reasonable. And it is, but with cover crops, there are specific issues because, for example, if you have really large seeded species like fava beans and you have 25 seeds per square foot, you can imagine fava beans get bell beans, and you saw some of our plants today, the sesbania, it gets really big. You don't want that many seeds per square foot. So you have to make slight adjustments for that. So that's my spiel on that. And really, gosh, this is our first ever video virtual event for a cover crop day. I'm very happy we had so many people come. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate all the help we had, all the staff. We all worked really hard on this. In fact, I think it was more hard work than a regular field day, actually. It's certainly more stressful for us all, but I think it's gone off really quite well. And I'd like to thank all my staff here listed, and you can contact us if you have any questions. We're happy to help. We have a website, and most of our publications are on our website. Some of our other publications that aren't listed on the website are listed on the EFOTOG, which is the Field Office Technical Guide. So they're available there. We're happy to give links to everybody. At the bottom of the page, you can see video production donated by Austin Bronson, who is an Earth Team volunteer. And it was awesome that he is able to help us as well. So with that, I think I would like to close this out and thank you all so much for attending.
Thank you,
Any
Margaret.
questions? Okay, thank you. And oh, this will be recorded, and in time it will be posted to this event, so you can look at it again. Thank you.